Hello, this is Peter Bell, and I am making a video recording for Chris Mack. Chris, these calculations are quite interesting, and I wanted to show you some drawings to go along with them. So, 3 pictures, some writing, and some calculations. I did the writing for you first, the calculations maybe, and then pictures I've just done in the last few minutes here. They show some interesting things. One of the first thing we talked about is how big is 1,000 tons. This is a rough representation of what it looks like. Putting this into context in a geological model is absolutely essential for planning a mining campaign. 7 meters is quite large. 7 cubic meters, generally you would not take this out in one chunk, right? Probably a little bit too large for small scale bulk sampling programs, underground, for example, in Nevada. So the question is, what other kind of shapes are appropriate? And the answer to that is a highly technical question. It has a lot to do with the geological deposit and existing underground developments. Having a accurate map of those things is essential to planning an effective campaign again. However, there are some interesting mathematics to consider, this being one of them, simplified object. Another one is considering the setting that exists at many places in Nevada where underground mine workings exist from tens and hundreds of years ago. Revisiting those and searching for high grade is an interesting endeavor, and you could potentially take out widths that are subsets of the high grade chutes, assuming that you can find some of those. Presumably they exist. Even any mineralized segment might be of interesting if you can do it at a sufficiently low cost. And the potential for some dental type drilling in here with careful ore recovery and dust management systems. Very important. A lot of these old mines in Nevada are very dry, and the rock is very friable and loose. High grade gold, risk of excessive dust and geotechnical instability is very severe, and permitting required to do this kind of narrow vein underground mining in old workings is unknown to me. I have no idea what would be required to permit it, or how much you could do of it, where, when. But if you had a project in Nevada that had several old mine workings with, known high grade, you could go in, as I've said, and throw shotcrete up on the walls and put steel girder beams in, wooden beams, whatever you might like to try to buttress existing workings. And if those things expose high grade, then it's basically the right thing to do. And the question is, how do you mine it? The answer might be by hand to some degree, or at least with, assisted or customized equipment. I've drawn up a diagram once before of a machine to automate the channel sampling process with, some blades at the front and a hammer drill bit in the middle, and then, like a heavy duty vacuum to capture all of the loose rock and dust and water and anything that might come out of a channel sampling program. Again, in Nevada, it would be a lot of dust and potentially gold in the dust, right? So a desire to capture all of that, very important. So the question is how to do that. The answer might be mining something that's 0.1 meters thick, 100 centimeters, I believe that is. It's fairly narrow mining width. Certainly not something that's practiced globally in many places that I know of. And to allocate, 400 cubic meters when you're drilling 100 centimeter widths is kind of unheard of. And the calculations that I did were able to show that if you would have roughly 5 meters by 16 meters of working space to allocate across 400 cubic meters. So if you were to run this as a trial mining method towards a 1,000-ton bulk sample within the state of Nevada permitting, you may be able to collect 1,000 tons of the most high grade material possible. And the way to do that is to access old mine workings, as I've indicated here, add structural support to old workings where necessary, put shotcrete potentially on the floors, on the roof, on the back. I don't know how much you want to cover up, but you potentially want to cover up lower grade material, even ore, if it allows you to more safely work particular high grade zones, which may well be the case. So the question becomes mining method, and there may be some need for some custom drilling equipment. It may need to be a university research project, or there may be a local person who can assist, even doing some of this stuff by hand. To consider that. If you had 1,000-ton bulk sampling permit, it doesn't necessarily impose any restrictions itself on mining method. Maybe it does. I'm unaware. It's possible that it does. I would expect so, particularly if the state of Nevada is interested in your mining permit, which they clearly would be. The safety plans and all this, very important for all industrial activities. People die at mine sites, so safety is the most important thing. And I'll say again, you could do this safely. You could access old workings and conduct a bulk sampling program by hand of the most high grade select material from old workings. And you could take that 5 meter by 16 meter dimensions and allocate it off across a dozen different rooms of an old mine, or across 5, 6 old maybe two or three old mine sites. You could go and search for high grade ore from 2 or 3 old mines, or 4 or 5 or 6, like as many old mines as you can get on some mineral claims, the better. And when you have old mines on your claims, you should consider working them in this way, right? So don't think of it in just big cubic areas like that. Think about it in terms of the old workings. Can you access them safely? What can you do to bring them up to some kind of current compliance? And is it possible to do hand mining of select high grade towards a bulk sampling permit? And if you did, what would that look like? And I'm saying here, you could do it from one big ore chute if you know of one that's the richest of them all, or you could allocate it across multiple examples. You could run this 0.1 meter thick mining method, across 100 feet of different wall space in select places of known mines. You could, within that 400 cubic meters, you could allocate it across, different known and unknown areas, potentially. It's unclear what else you could do to it just from this description. For example, concentrating. Again, if it's possible to do some kind of pre-concentrating at the mine face, how does that factor into the permit? A lot of the old mines, the way that old timers did it, is stacking rock backfill, and to replicate that by hand with effectively pre-concentrating, hand cobbing material at the mine face, what does that do to your 1,000 tons, right? If you break out 5,000 tons of rock and leave 4,000 tons at the face, and you only take out 1,000 tons, what was your mining rate? And what is your permitted allowance? Like, is that allowed under your permit, for example? And then who could do that work possibly, right? Who knows? There may be a case of hiring somebody internationally. It could potentially be some kind of community development, outreach, business development initiative. I'm sure there's people who know to mine things by hand out there in the world who'd be willing and able to come to Nevada and would work for affordable rates, potentially. Anyways, there's surely local people who would do it as well. I can't even imagine, but these are some of the calculations that would be relevant to that. And maybe one more image to consider is 1 meter square access way. So this is typically too small for a person, but if you're doing robot assisted mining, then this is potentially a mineable width. And if you do a meter by a meter, you can get 400 meters extent, which is quite a lot. So again, think of allocating that across different stopes, right? Like, if ore chutes are running vertically and the face is gone, but you can see ore in the floor or something like that, go down on it with one of these robot things, and they can install, you can install safety equipment to buttress the rock in that area, kind of like isolate your effect on it, because potentially that those ore zones are important structurally, and taking them out can be impactful on the geotechnical stability of a unit of rock. You don't want to be causing slides and collapses and problems like this, even taking any amount of rock out. So again, it's possible to buttress kind of what these two lines are indicating on either side, and they're also indicating the dimensions, right, and allocating this across multiple areas of old known mine workings. That's an interesting thing to do. Some notes here for you on narrow vein, etc. And then just a bunch of calculations showing the things that I've just been describing, right? So another thing that I would mention is the potential for a micropit, right? My thinking here is that some of your holes, maybe your drill holes at surface, may be collared in ore. And if there's, if you can punch it, get an RC drill going, right? Just start punching a bunch of holes shallow at known gold zones and build a surface resource, right? Please. That's a great thing to do. Adds ounces quick and cheap. And they're mineable ounces oftentimes too, right? So what's a bulk sample have to say about a surface pit? Is that fair game? A pit that's a meter deep and a meter wide, the radius, 45-degree angle, just pretty short and simple. How much volume would that give you? And the answer is it would give you 1 cubic meter. That's not very much. So I'm telling you that you could do an area a meter wide around every hole that's collared in ore and a meter deep, assuming geotechnical stability of a small pit like that, 45-degree angle, you would get a 1 cubic meter production rate. So that means if you went all in on the micropit design, you could do 1,000 micropits, which would address 1,000 different drill holes that might be collared in ore. So if you have a drill crew who is incentivized to find spots at surface where they can collar a hole in ore, then they should be greatly rewarded for finding as many of those such areas as possible. And assuming that you have some way to mine, a micro pit. Again, there may need to be some customization of technology to do that. So this may be technically unfeasible at this time, but it may also be something that can be done by hand instead. I don't know what kind of blasting might be required sometimes to do a meter down. Probably some. Is it possible to use a small backhoe, small machinery, jackhammers and such, to do these kinds of small holes, small pits? Surface mining with, highway equipment almost? Again, what's the cost on that to do a meter cone? Possibly not very much. And if you're able to do 1,000 of them all on known mineralization, it's pretty good surface production. And it gives you a lot of information about what gold at surface looks like. So I don't know what kind of batching you would want to do with these. Assay production costs might be high, but presumably it's profitable, and it might prove to be one of the most profitable ways to allocate tonnage within a bulk sampling permit. And there's something that I will explain further another time, which is that it's the goal there is a tonnage bottleneck, which has implications for the goal of the system, which becomes dollars per tons. Somewhat surprisingly. If you'll study the Whittle Consulting money mining methodology, you'll find out that dollars per ton is rarely the right unit. But in this case, the bottleneck is permitted tons. So the bottleneck unit is tons. And if you're operating under those constraints, then that's your objective, which is great because there's a variety of mining methods to produce different amounts of tons, and those different methods have different cost structures, and there's different constraints within your permits as well that go beyond these calculations. But the final part of all this being presumably you can work towards some sort of budgeting, right? Where you're looking at how many tons can we do for how much? How much does it cost? I think micropits, what is that? $50,000. If you put $50,000 towards micropits, what would you get? Not very much, right? You'd get maybe a week, 5 days of like a highway crew digging pits 1 meter deep. You'd have to blast them up with dynamite beforehand probably, and maybe you'd get, you might, I don't know if you could move 5,000 tons of rock out of cone shapes, 1 meter deep and 1 meter wide at a bunch of different sites. 5,000 tons, that's like 5,000 different cones like that. That's unrealistic. It would not be 5,000 tons of production. It would be much lower, I think. Each cone was only 1 cubic meter. So how many cones, 1 meter wide and 1 meter deep, can you do for $50,000? I don't know, 50, 100. It's more like that. Which may not be correct either. I don't know. Right, so I'm going to put this. Again, some concentrating costs. I don't know any of these numbers, but I want to know what they are. And that's where, potentially you get a bidding process to come in. And so you talk to some people who could actually execute these work programs and ask them to fill out this amount, these numbers. If we give them $50,000, how many cones could they do? And how many cones do we have that are worth them doing? Remains to be seen. And the same for underground. This is highly subjective, hypothetical numbers in this case, but I wanted to show, imagine you could do 1,000 tons. And get your costs down there. That would be silly. Imagine that. I don't even, what basis. Anyways, more silly numbers that, are not correct, but I would like to see included and filled out by people who know the answers to some of these questions. I certainly don't, but I wonder. So, thank you.